A can-do movie is a movie that just insists on being made. It doesn't care what kind of resources it lacks. It will get finished. And why do I like can-do movies? It's because I've made a couple of them myself.
All right, we're sticking with the Frank Henenlotter theme again. Yet another week of Frank Henenlotter goodness, and this week it is Basket Case 2. Obviously the sequel to the first video I did in this Henenlotter series, Basket Case. This was made in 1990, 8 years after Basket Case was made, so I think it's kind of important to keep that in mind. 8 years have passed in the lives of Frank Henenlotter, as well as the lives of these actors, as well as the life of Times Square. So we'll get into all that. Once again, 3 movies deep, still written and directed by Frank Henenlotter. He likes to be a one-man show, although he's going to change that just a little bit in the next couple weeks, so stay tuned for that. The budget on this one was $2.5 million, which is the largest budget so far that Frank Henenlotter's had to work with. Last week when we talked about Brain Damage, it was 1.5 million, so he went from 35,000, 1.5 million. Now he's at 2.5 million, and I think that's probably going to be the ceiling on the movies that we're going to cover, but if I'm wrong, I'll apologize. Once again, this movie is starring Kevin Van Hentenryck, so you get to see me once again stumble over that name Van Hentenryck, but I've been practicing. I just like look in the mirror, Van Hentenryck, Van Hentenryck, Van Hentenryck, Van Hentenryck. Anyway, it's starring Kevin Van Hentenryck. Henenlotter made this movie in order to get financing to make sure that he could get the necessary funding to make the next movie we're going to talk about, Frankenhooker. So this is kind of like that whole trope of one for the studio, one for me. Basket Case had been such a cult hit that the direct-to-video market back then, when people were still renting their VHS tapes for their home entertainment, well, it was begging for a sequel. So 8 years after the fact, Henenlotter broke down and made a sequel. He didn't really want to, because just like the way I feel at the end of Basket Case, he also felt like that was the end of the story. He had, in his original script, Dwayne and Belial died from that fall from the window, and he was ready to leave it there. You got a perfect story. Don't go adding an unnecessary epilogue to it. Unless it's Rocky 2, Rocky 3, Rocky 4. Then you need to do it, because those had some punch. So this movie picks right up literally on the same day that Basket Case 1 ended. And there's some problems with that. Like I say, that doesn't work all that great because, as I stressed at the beginning, 8 years have passed in the real world since Basket Case 1. So when you go 8 years later and say that this is just a couple of minutes after the end of Basket Case 1, there are some there's some pretty serious continuity issues there. It makes it less than perfect. But Times Square between 1982 and 1990, well, there was the Giuliani administration in New York, and it had just a radical transformation from this cool seedy place with grindhouse cinemas and that sort of thing, peep shows, all that kind of dirty stuff that looks just so good in those 70s movies and 70s TV shows, to a place where it's like Disneyland without any rides or something like that. A place to take the family when they visit New York and get pictures. It had the gigantic Coca-Cola digital billboards and things like that. And they actually filmed a little bit in Times Square with no explanation on that radical change in what was supposed to be about 5 minutes or less from the end of the first one. But the nice thing is, if you had seen Basket Case when it came out, and you hadn't watched it a whole lot since then, it's enough time that's passed. People just weren't as much of a stickler for detail in 1990 as they are today. At least I wasn't, and apparently a lot of other people weren't either, because they rented this movie many times. Also, the fashion changed. Now, the changes in Times Square, there's not much that Henenlotter can do about that. That didn't jar me at all. But the fashion in 1990 is very distinct. A whole lot of shoulder pads and blazers and, well, the hair. That bothered me more than the change in the physical environment. But you got to do what you got to do. There are reasons, pretty good reasons, why Henenlotter couldn't make this a period piece. He couldn't set it in 1982. Because, first of all, that just runs the budget way up. When you're trying to get wardrobe to match the wardrobe they had in the first movie, you're just going to have to spend more money. Even paying somebody to go to the thrift stores and look for it. You might look for weeks on end and not find what you need. That's a lot of money. But it's a whole lot easier just to go down to JCPenney's, buy some stuff for everybody to wear, and call it a day. Let's get to making the movie. And I'll also add, like I said, this wasn't something Henenlotter really considered a passion project, so maybe he just wanted to get it made, satisfy the producer, Glickenhaus, and then move on to what he really wanted to make, Frankenhooker. And also, there's just no way with $2.5 million you can do anything to make Times Square look like it used to. You'd have to build a whole new Times Square on a back lot, and that's way above the $2.5 million budget. Or you could green screen it. Oh man, I don't know that in 1990, I was probably would blue screen it. I don't know, blue screen, green screen. Once again, you don't get to do that for free. And you can tell, it's just not good. I prefer the way that they approached it, though it just had some curses that could not be cured. Now, what Henenlotter did do, which I think was a wise choice, is he got everybody out of New York City as fast as possible, so we didn't have to dwell on how much the city had changed since the first one, which was 8 years. So he immediately puts Belial and Dwayne into an interior shots until they come outside briefly with a little brief exterior shot. Then they're off to the countryside. Once you're in the countryside, things are kind of timeless. Everything looked like it's still from, I don't know, 1910 or something. So that was a real good choice. And I can't think that that was an accidental choice. Henenlotter knew his budgetary restrictions. He's a can-do movie maker. He made the first Basket Case for 35 grand, so he knew this was a way to get out there, save money, make the most of what you do have, because he did have some interesting stuff. But they went out to some place in New Jersey. Ho-Hocus? That sounds like I'm making that up, because it's like ho-ho-cuss. 3 words with hyphens in between them or whatever. But I promise I'm not making that up. I think that's the name of the town. But what we find out at the very beginning is that Dwayne and Belial survived the fall. Like, I didn't know what kind of interesting twist Henenlotter was going to try to give us to explain the fact that Dwayne and Belial are alive in part 2. Maybe it was going to be some lightning striking resurrection like you see in Friday the 13th part 8. Not a movie people like to talk about in a positive manner, but that's the first Friday the 13th movie I saw in the theaters. Holds a special place in my heart. But instead of coming up with some way that they survived, he just said, hey, they survived the fall. And it was only like a 3rd floor, so I guess you could survive that fall. And you don't really have to suspend your disbelief too much. It's just disappointing to people who really were emotionally invested in that ending in the first one. And, you survive a fall, obviously, ambulances come, they pick you up, they take you to the hospital. And Belial and Dwayne go to the hospital where our story really starts to unfold. This is just trying to get us from Basket Case 1 to Basket Case 2. But once they're in the hospital, it's not very long until Belial decides to attack and kill this security guard that's there. And once he kills that security guard, the other security guards are too busy either flirting, sleeping, doing whatever they want to do. One of them's tied up trying to keep a newspaper reporter out of the hospital. And Dwayne just picks up Belial, just as easy as can be, just trots right out, and nobody seems to notice. So I'll be honest, I've worked in hospitals for about 30 years, off and on. Yeah, 26 years, let's be fair. I'm trying to inflate it a little bit. Actually, 23 years. Give me some forgiveness here. But anyway, it's pretty easy to believe. Patients disappear sometimes. People, especially now, they're kind of understaffed. If somebody wants to get out, they just get up and walk out, and then you have to try to do a manhunt or something. Well, there's already a manhunt for Dwayne and Belial because they murdered 5 people in the first movie. Of course there's a manhunt. There ends up being $1 million reward for anybody that can bring them back. But Dwayne has all these bandages on his head. And when he fell, I guess you could say he got a pretty vicious head injury, but those bandages look kind of like what a Civil War doctor would put on somebody with a cannonball injury. But they were actually a smart choice because they wrapped his whole head up. And I thought about it. He didn't have the same haircut he had 8 years ago. He also didn't exactly have the same hair texture. And when they tried the wig in Basket Case, I'm sorry, man, but that was an absolute failure. There is no way to spin any positive out of that wig on Brain Damage, I should say, not Basket Case. But they tried that wig, it didn't work. So here they got the bandages around his head. He goes off to the countryside, cut to after he's had a shower and a haircut and some new clothes. And he's got, his actual haircut at that point, which is much shorter, but still a little curly on top. Still got just a little bit of Eau de Dwayne. Then we get back to it. Stop what you're doing, because I'm about to ruin the mother flipping video that you're used to. It's Basket Case, and I'm on the case. Ain't nobody gonna take my place, because it's
basket case. And I am just like Green Day, I too am a basket case. Now let's buckle your garter belts up, son. And then we pick up where the fuck you left off.
Now, just as Dwayne is walking out with his mutated former conjoined twin in his arms, conveniently this lady named Granny Ruth pulls up in a van. And one nice little detail is that I noticed right away that the van had these handicap tags on it. And I thought, oh man, they must have borrowed somebody's van that has handicap tags on it. But I think that was intentional. First off, it let her park wherever the heck she wanted to at the hospital so she could do a quick snatch and grab on Dwayne and Belial. But also, as we learn more about Granny Ruth, she has some what we'll call boarders, people who are staying in her house that probably qualify for a handicap permit. And if she's going to transport them, she's going to need that. And of course, Dwayne's an adult, so it doesn't really apply. But I do love the way that a lady just pulls up in a van and says, I was friends with your aunt, get in. And he just gets into the van with this stranger and she drives away. That was very different than what they taught us when I was in school about stranger danger. If somebody says they're a friend of your parent and they were sent to pick you up, you knew they were lying unless they had the secret word. Mine was chocolate. But with Granny Ruth, there's this young lady named Susan. And Susan immediately catches Dwayne's eye. He's got a little bit of a glimmer in his eye when he sees her. You can tell he's sweet on her immediately. And Granny takes him out to the countryside. Like I said, they get out of the city as fast as they can. They go out to Hohokus, New Jersey. And she's got this really nice plantation house. Like the place that they filmed it was, or at least for the exterior shots, was some kind of public place called the Tuesday Tea Club or something like that. I can't remember now. But it's a really nice historical kind of mansion sort of thing. Beautiful grounds. And it's so big because Granny Ruth has some people staying there. She has a group of people that she refers to as unique individuals. I think Todd Browning would refer to them as freaks. I think that Chris Claremont would call them mutants. But the deal is, they definitely are unique individuals. And something else I noticed right away is that the reason she has these unique individuals is because it's a bit of her interest in her career, which is either a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I can't quite tell which, but that makes Granny Dr. Ruth. Please tell me somebody knows who Dr. Ruth is. And that kind of goes with Henenlotter's obsession with sex in his movie. But we get to go up into the attic and meet this menagerie of freaks that Granny Ruth has. And they're great. I mean, this is probably the high point of the movie. And once again, Gabe Bartalos, the same person who made Aylmer and puppeted Aylmer for Brain Damage, he's the guy that created all of these unique individuals. Their makeup, their prosthetics, some of them are just pure on puppets, but he's the guy who did all of this, and I love that guy. He's great. You get a serious upgrade in Belial from the first one, and it's animated better, and there's a version of it that's actually a latex mask, so you get genuine, true facial movements, a little bit better than what we had in the first one. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of these people that are staying up, these unique individuals. We got a guy that I call Mac the Knife. Once again, man, I am just old. These are all Gen X references. But McDonald's had a commercial with this character called Mac the Knife, or Mac Tonight, actually, not Mac the Knife. And they got a character that they call Half Moon. He's got kind of a weird skin texture that wraps around looking a lot like Half Moon, but when I was watching it with MVD, I just kept calling him Mac the Knife instead of Mac Tonight. I can't even make my jokes properly. I'm so old. There's another character that was inspired by The Brain That Couldn't Die. That's not something I recognize, but MVD pointed that out to me. And then he sent me a picture of the character that inspired this one from The Brain That Wouldn't Die. And I got to say, it's spot on. And it doesn't surprise me that Henenlotter would be a fan of some of those old creature features. It just seems to be in his DNA. There's an opera singing lump. I don't know how to explain it other than that. It's kind of like Belial with a much bigger mouth and some glorious teeth. And it sings opera. And it doesn't really show up for the rest of the movie, but it's a nice little introduction there when the freaks are getting introduced. There's a toothy guy. And I call him a toothy guy, but these teeth are like blades. I think that MVD once again said there was a character on MTV's Liquid Television that had like lawnmower blades sliced into the side of his head, and he looked a lot like this. But some of those teeth are like sticking way out here. The toothy guy, man, he could have used some braces growing up. I feel bad for him. And there's a guy with 27 noses. That's kind of out of left field, right? But, they did not want to use actual deformities as much as Frank Henenlotter is an exploitation cinema maker, or he makes exploitation films. He did not want to exploit disabled people that really exist, actual human occurring conditions, because, he likes to exploit people, but he's not going to punch down. He's not going to exploit people that haven't done anything wrong. But 27 Noses, all I could think is, man, when he goes into a gas station restroom, it must smell terrible. It hits him 27 times as hard as it hits me and you. There's another guy, I just call him Worm Eye, because he's got like some worms coming out of his eye, and I don't know much else. I think he has another name, but I call him Worm Eye. There's a frog guy. There's some others too. There's, a guy that has a head kind of like a goblin or a mouse mixed together. There's just odds and ends. There's somebody called Platehead. But anyway, there's a whole menagerie here, and they're great. And then in the end, Granny Ruth, in the end of this scene, not in the end of the movie, but Granny Ruth introduces Dwayne and Belial to a mysterious individual named Eve, who is covered with a blanket. And then Belial looks into that blanket, and I'll say that that blanket is arranged in a way that might remind someone of motherhood. That's the most polite way I can say that it looks like a birth canal. We don't see Eve, but we know right away that Eve's pretty much going to be the same kind of thing as Belial. It's going to be his soulmate, or his finally found a lady that he can dance with, that kind of thing. But this movie, as I kind of described that menagerie, this is so obviously inspired by Todd Browning's Freaks. The difference being Todd Browning used people with actual differences, disabilities, malformations. He used a wide array of folks. And here, the one thing that they did avoid was doing anything that could be exploitative of disabled people, I guess I would say. Or do they still say physically challenged? We said that some in the 90s. But this movie is Freaks all the way to the end. It even has a little bit of a one of us motif in it. And of course, there's that famous chant in Freaks, one of us, gobble, gobble, one of us, gobble, gobble, something like that. And this ends with a confrontation, or doesn't really end with that confrontation, but it includes in the third act a confrontation not unlike the one at the end of Freaks. Something else that I noticed is that there's a lot of Jolt Cola in this movie. And sort of the stage legend, the backstage, might be apocryphal, might be true, but the story goes that Frank Henenlotter drank so much Jolt Cola when he was making this movie, I guess long days, and he needed some caffeine, and there was no such thing as Monster, Red Bull, C4, Ghost, any of those things, Celsius. None of that stuff was around back then. You just had Jolt or you had coffee. So he drank so much Jolt that Jolt Cola actually agreed to help finance the film, and this is legitimately Jolt Cola product placement in Basket Case 2, and I can't think of anything that makes more sense in my life. Those two go together. Somebody told me they'd never drank any Jolt Cola before. Me, being the age I am, I tried it once, and I told him it's like diarrhea in a can. So he was glad that he missed out on that experience. And then there's this group of people. It starts with this newspaper reporter, this journalist is what I'm calling her, along with her photographer, and then they get a private investigator to help them out. And they're kind of following Granny Ruth around. It reminds me a lot of the old guy from the early 80s Incredible Hulk that was following David Banner around. And you know what I'm talking about when I say David Banner instead of Bruce Banner. That tells you the show. But he was always following David Banner from town to town because he wanted to write an expose that proved the Hulk was real and not just a legend. Well, this lady wants to kind of do the same thing with all the unique individuals at Granny Ruth's house. And I think they get treated a little more harshly than the guy from the Incredible Hulk got treated. Because eventually they find what they're looking for, and that turns out to be more of a curse than a gift, you could say. Because the head reporter, the person who started all this, well, she ends up getting some pretty cool looking facial mutilation. She gets the kind of mutilation that would make her fit in with the people that are living in this sanctuary for unique individuals. She becomes a unique individual. She becomes one of us. And that's a nice poetic punishment. It's one of those things where they call it contrapasso or something. It's where the punishment meets the crime. I think it's sort of something that Milton played around with. And of course, the photographer, the private investigator, well, they get whacked in the Tony Soprano sense of the word. They get whacked. And they meet their makers, and they get what they deserve for what they're doing here in the world of Basket Case 2. In the real world, maybe you just cite him for trespassing. I don't know. Now, of course, Belial falls for Eve. You know, we finally get a reveal of this little creature under the blanket. Belial takes to her, she takes to him. It's like love at first sight between these two lumps of flesh, which, you know, that's kind of the story of my life. But anyway, we get to see them in what might be the greatest love scene in the history of cinema. I think it's the most appropriate use of the phrase I've ever seen, bumping uglies. Because they bump uglies. And I had to watch it. At first, I was just repulsed. But the more I watched it, the more I started laughing. And you just had to sit and dwell on the bumping of uglies between these two ugly lumps, bumping up against each other with perhaps more enthusiasm than you needed in the movie, but it's Frank Henenlotter, so he goes for broke. It made me laugh. I gotta admit, I'm almost ashamed to admit it, might have been my favorite scene in the movie. And, you know, kind of paralleling Eve and Belial, Susan and Dwayne start to have their own little romance that flares up. And you know, it's no secret. From the first scene of the movie, you know that Susan had a conjoined twin that was Eve. Dwayne had a conjoined twin that's Belial. You know, it's telegraphed, telescope, whatever. You can see it coming from a mile away. But they're sort of doing this parallel thing where one brother and sister, another brother and sister. But then he finds out that Susan has a secret pregnancy. She's been pregnant for 6 years because this isn't a normal movie. This is a Frank Henenlotter movie. It's not a normal screenplay. It's a Henenlotter screenplay. So she's been pregnant for 6 years. They've tried multiple C-sections, but the baby refuses to leave her womb. So she's decided to just keep it until it's ready to come out. And her, I don't know, C-section scars open up. Dwayne gets a good look at the baby she's carrying. And I will say this gives whole new meaning to the phrase pregnancy scare. Dwayne doesn't like that. I think he loses interest in Susan pretty quickly, and he shoves her out a window, and we have, just like Basket Case 1 kind of ends with someone falling out of a window, here in Basket Case 2 there is another window falling scene. Nice little echo of the first movie without directly rehashing the first film. And now I'm curious. I've never seen Basket Case 3. In a couple of weeks when I watch Basket Case 3, I want to see if that also ends with somebody falling out of a window. If it doesn't, I think it's a real missed opportunity for Frank Henenlotter. So this kind of brings to life Dwayne's shortcomings. You know, I sort of found Dwayne to be sympathetic in the first one, but here he's not really sympathetic at all. He has no empathy or sympathy for these unique individuals. He wants other people to accept his baggage. He didn't want to be judged because of his relationship with Belial. Yet he won't return the favor for Susan. He kind of wants to escape this house of freaks, he says many times. And that just shows that he's kind of a hypocrite, I think is the best term for that. And there's a nice little parallel too with Basket Case 1, because I like to look for that in a franchise or a book series or even within the same film. But in Basket Case 1, just to narrow it down to the simplest terms, words that everybody can understand, the normal sibling has a normal love interest, and the abnormal sibling kills the Dwayne's love interest. And now it's turned around where Dwayne is the normal brother who kills the abnormal love interest. So it shows a nice parallel that those brothers are the same. Belial doesn't like Dwayne being with a normal guy or normal girl. Dwayne doesn't like being with an abnormal girl. And it ends up with lovers being killed at the end of the third act both ways. It just changes who the real villain is here. There's not really much villain-esque behavior out of Belial this time around. He just needed to find somebody who would love him for who he is, and he wasn't a bad guy anymore. Dwayne goes in the opposite direction. And in the end, the movie ends with this glorious scene. Dwayne has finally had like this psychotic break. He's flipped out. He becomes a radically accepted freak. You know, he takes on just saying, hey, I'm not just a freak. I'm the biggest freak of all. He grabs a big old knitting needle that's got some yarn on it, puts Belial on his side and just starts stitching him back where he came from. Belial's squealing in pain. Blood's running all down his side. He has crazy eyes, and the movie ends. So the high points on this movie. It's not Basket Case 1 by any means, but it's still got some high points. I really like the menagerie, as I call them, all of the unique individuals. I like their makeup. I like their prosthetics. It definitely would not pass for something you would see in a contemporary film. I mean, not contemporary, modern film. But I kind of like practical effects. I kind of like things that are less than perfect. It's not even quite as good as like Muppets or Jim Henson, but it puts you to mind of something like that. And I really enjoy that can-do ethos. That's what I'm doing all this for. So that definitely feels can-do. To me, it's a high point. The bumping uglies. You know, that scene where they're bumping uglies. I'm sorry. I laughed at it so hard, I had to send that scene to Adam. Don't know how he felt about it. It's probably not a nice thing to do to your friend, to send him that bumping ugly scene, but it was just something I'll never forget. So that makes it a high point. And there's also this character I didn't talk about called Mr. Barker, who's running kind of a scam freak show at his farm or something. He has all these like fake versions, including a fake version of Belial. And that actor is absolutely nuts, insane. Like, I don't think the character's nuts and insane. I think the actor actually is. Has a face like Popeye, skinny body, wearing a union suit, running around, you know, like the long johns that are all one piece. He was a fun little addition. He wasn't in the movie for very long, but you know, the brightest candles burn out the quickest. Now, warts. We got the biggest warts of any of the Henenlotter movies I've covered so far here in Basket Case 2. First off, compared to Brain Damage and Basket Case, and I'll specifically compare it to Basket Case 1 since this is a sequel of that movie, but it just totally lacks story depth. It doesn't have the thematic richness. It's pretty straightforward story just to get a reaction out of people. Build a bunch of freaks, have them kill people. Touches on a little bit of psychology and emotion there at the end, but all in all, it's like a teaspoon in this movie, whereas we had buckets full in the last one. And this movie starts to expose Kevin Van Hentenrich's limits as an actor. He's asked to do a little bit more. I think he has to do something besides just being himself, which is what I think he did mostly in Basket Case 1. Plus, he's aged a little bit, so he's having some trouble being a convincing version of who he was in the first movie. There's a reason that he doesn't have a Wikipedia page. You know, there's a reason he hasn't made any non-Basket Case movies that I'm aware of, other than that cameo in Brain Damage, but that doesn't count. And this really shows me why. He's not a great actor. As much as I thought he was perfect in the first one, I wish that first one would have just stopped like a perfect little moment in time and, you know. And then my last wart that I'm going to talk about is continuity issues. There's just really, really jarring going from 1982 to 1990. I don't think Henenlotter had to do that. I think it would have been pretty easy for him to just say Dwayne was in a coma for 8 years. And in 1990, he woke up and that's when the escape begins. That could have explained a lot of things. But instead of the coma, he wanted to pick right up where he left off. Who am I to tell Frank Henenlotter what to do? I'm just telling you what I wish he would have done. So the final word, it's good fun. It is a fun thing to watch with your friends. You're going to laugh more in this one than you do in Basket Case. You're going to laugh less probably than you do in Brain Damage. It's a fine enough sequel. It's like a lot of sequels. It just doesn't have the brightness that the first one did. It doesn't catch us off guard like the first one did. So I'm going to give this one 3.5 out of 5 Ed Woods.